What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be looking at Gregory of Nyssa on the predicating attributes to God, specifically from his Against Eunomius, Book 7, paragraph 4 to 5, specifically. Alright, cool. So Eunomius was saying explicitly that Lord signifies the essence and Spirit signifies the essence. And this is an explicit quotation from him. He says, of those essences which are divergent, the appellations significant of essence are also surely divergent. But where there is one and the same name, that which is declared by the same appellation will surely be one also. So he has this idea of essence where if you say like God is the Lord, it's referring to his essence, and then the definition is interchangeable. But Gregory explicitly says, he says, nothing can signify the divine essence. He says, he makes these complaints at us because we know no name significant of the divine nature. So Eunomius is arguing against Gregory, and I guess like everybody in Gregory's camp, because he says, oh, you can't even say anything about the divine nature. But Gregory explicitly says, we are taught the fact of its existence, while we assert that an appellation of such force as to include the unspeakable in infinite nature either does not exist at all, or at any rate is unknown to us. So we cannot indicate the divine nature in anything, in any single sense. And this is like, I think the way Gregory is understanding nature is if Eunomius is saying Lord signifies nature, or Lord signifies the essence of God, Gregory keeps making this argument that if it really signifies the essence of God, then these two words are interchangeable. Namely, the essence of God has some sort of definition. Of course, the definition is too much for us to understand, but it has a definition. If you say Lord is the essence of God, the way Eunomius is saying it, then they have one and the same definition, namely Lord and essence. And so this is a problem for Gregory because, for example, he will go on to explain, to debunk, I guess, how Eunomius says that ungeneracy is also the essence. The idea that you came from nowhere, you don't derive your being from anything. Obviously, the Father doesn't derive his being from anywhere, anybody, or anyone, or anything, or whatever. And Gregory's like, okay, if you really think ungeneracy is the essence, then you're basically saying that ungeneracy has the exact same definition as the essence would have. And then he's like, okay, so how would you even say that God is ungenerate? Because just by saying he's ungenerate, since you've equivocated the definitions, now how would you say he's ungenerate? Because if you say God is ungenerate, you're just basically saying God is his essence, which according to Gregory doesn't make sense. And you'll see this a lot in the Cappadocians. They make that argument. Basil makes it in his Against Eunomius. Gregory the theologian makes it, and Gregory of Nyssa makes it so many times. And so Gregory starts to unpack. He's like, okay, how do we even predicate things of subject? So when we say this person was generated, our ideas are twofold, namely a subject and a predicate. The word is understood with every name concerning the divine nature, such as just, incorruptible, etc. So if someone says God, a righteous judge, Gregory says we basically import the is there so it can be correctly understood. So is always understood with every name. And so he says, when we say he is a judge, God is a judge, Gregory says we're conceiving him, we conceive concerning him some operation of judgment, and by the is carry our mind to the subject, and hereby clearly taught not to suppose that the account of his being is the same with the action, or as a result of saying he is generated or ungenerate, we divide our thought into a double conception. By is understanding the subject, and by generated or ungenerated apprehending that which belongs to the subject. So yeah, I think it is pretty clear. This is his Against Eunomius Book 7, that he's saying our minds are brought to the attention of the action and not the being if we call him a judge. or if we say he is generated, we're not brought to the idea of being. We're just brought to the idea of generated being applied to the being. He said he thinks they're distinct. There's generated and there's being, and so you apply the generated to the being. And so, as then we are taught by David that God is a judge or patient, we do not learn the divine essence, but one of the attributes which are contemplated in it. So in this case too, when we hear of his being not generated, we do not understand by this negative predication, understand the subject, but are guided as to what we must not think concerning the subject, while what he is essentially remains as such as ever unexplained. So once again, he's basically using like judge or patient, and he's giving an example of how it works when you're predicating justice or patience or ungenerously unto God. Namely, that it's not explaining his essence, but it's explaining an attribute that's contemplated with it. Either where he derives his being from, that's ungenerate, or his actions, or that he's just and patient. So, and by the way, these are explicit quotations. I'm not paraphrasing anything. So, God or good is not the being. My days. For every name which you may use is an attribute of the being, but is not the being itself. So he says good, ungenerate, incorruptible, but to each of those does not fail to be supplied. If anyone then who undertakes to give the account of his good being, of this ungenerate being, as he is, would speak in vain. But if he rehearsed the attributes contemplated in him, and were silent to that essence by which he undertakes by his word to explain. So I think it's pretty clear again. Whenever you say a name of God, you're basically contemplating an attribute. You're not contemplating the essence, you're contemplating an attribute in the essence. Because you can't say anything about the essence, but you can say things about the attributes. So he makes a very clear distinction, being versus being in some way. So there is a distinction between being and being in a particular way. For example, being versus being just, it's different for Gregory. So, for example, to be without generation is one of the attributes contemplated in the being. But the definition of the being is one thing, and that of being in a particular way is another. And did I give an example? I don't think I did, but for example, to really explain this, Gregory, in his On Not Three Gods, I'm pretty sure On Not Three Gods, he gives an example of a tree. So you have two trees. One was planted and one was grown out of the nature. So they're both trees. It's a tree and a tree, but they're trees in different ways. They're being in particular ways. Namely, this one was planted and this one was grown out of nature. And that has nothing to do with their being. They are still trees. Those are attributes of their being. So, if saying God is good doesn't signify essence at all, because it is unknowable, and rather it signifies an attribute of essence or an operation of God. According to Gregory, it is one thing to be and another to be in a particular way. So, I don't know, my phrasing in this sentence was trash, but just, I don't know. Okay. And then on Not Three Gods, we have him basically saying something very similar, where if we really can't, if we're following his Against Eunomia, so book 7, that you really can't say anything about the being, and anything is really just a contemplation of an attribute in the being, or the way in which a being is, then even Godhead itself cannot be significant of nature. And this is explicit quotation from again. So Godhead is significant of nature, but of operation. In order then to mark the constancy of our conception of infinity in the case of the divine nature, we can say that the deity is above every name, and Godhead is a name. Now it cannot be at once a name and above every name. So you can't even say Godhead concerns or is significant of the divine nature. Rather, it's significant of an attribute in the divine nature or the operations, which in this case he says the operations. And we see something, bro. This is like very, very clear throughout all his works. This is not like a quote mine about, like goodness refers to the attribute, and not the essence. But this is very clear throughout all his works. Oh crap! So, for example, let me put this in charge. We have, okay. For example, we have in his Sermon 6 on the Beatitudes, which is a very good sermon. It is the same way as with human works of art, where in a way the mind can perceive the maker of the product that is before it, because he has left on his work the stamp of his art. In this, however, is not seen the nature of the artist, but only the artistic skill which he has left impressed on his handiwork. Thus also, when we look at the order of creation, we form in our minds an image not of the essence, but of the wisdom of him who made all things wisely. So he says, in our minds, we form an image of his wisdom and not his essence. So obviously there's a distinction between his wisdom and his essence. Okay. And one more time in the Sermon 6. For he is invisible by nature, but becomes visible in his energies. For he may be contemplated in the things that are referred to him. And also, if we consider the cause of our life, that he came to create man not from necessity, but from the free decision of his goodness, we say we have contemplated God by this way, that we have apprehended his goodness, though again, not his essence, but his goodness. So we contemplate God's goodness, but not God's essence. Obviously, then there's a distinction between the goodness and the essence, according to Gregory. The essence remains hidden, the attributes and energies is how we know God. So then there's obviously a distinction for Gregory between attributes, which I'm going to call A, and E, which is essence. So A is perceptible, E is not. A is visible, E is not. A is contemplatable, and E is not. And this is a question for Gregory. Then can we say the nature is really good then? Like, if we can't even say anything about the nature, then can we even say it's good? What is it? Is it going to be bad or something? Would we be saying God is bad if we cannot say that he is good? I say not necessarily, because we know that nature is never opposed to operations. God is super essential and is above goodness itself. We know this because of his operations, as fire will never produce cold air. It always produces hot air, so you call fire hot. But you wouldn't say the nature, well, I guess you would because it's something finite. Fire is finite, but yeah, you understand the point that the nature can't be necessarily opposed to its operations, especially in the case of God. So we can rightly call fire hot, although we are just perceiving its operation. And also, this is clear throughout Gregory's work that the nature is super essential. Obviously, this is a Dionysian term mainly, but it is here as well. Since then, the only begotten God is by nature the good, or rather beyond all good. And this is that's the last slide, but it's very interesting throughout Gregory's works how like the essence is completely unknowable, and goodness refers to some sort of operation or an attribute of the essence. And he even brings a couple times, he says like, if eunomius, you really think goodness is identical to the essence, or ungeneracy is identical to the essence, and then you're able to say that that you know the definition of God's essence, basically, or you know what God's essence is. You know his essence is good, like a positive predicate of the essence. He asks Eunomius in against Eunomius' book when he says, "Alright, bro, tell me the nature of an ant. Yeah, the smallest thing ever. You can step on an ant and kill it. The smallest thing ever. Tell me." He was like, "Tell me, do they have a vertebrae in their back? Tell me, do they have two genders? Tell me, how many bones do they have in their body? Do they even have bones?" And I guarantee Eunomius couldn't do it, because an ant is finite and is probably the most finite thing ever. Bro, an ant can get blown in the wind. Nah, them ants are pretty strong. Yeah, when they're in groups, they're pretty strong. But that's besides the point. He's like, okay, you can't even tell me the nature of an ant, and he says in a different way. And he's like, okay, how the hell can you then tell me the nature of the almighty deity if you can't even tell me the nature of an ant. So yeah, that's basically it. So thank you, man, very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.